LuMaye.
Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, brand new book, A Nation Like No Other, Why American Exceptionalism Matters, and he happens to be running for President of the United States. I'm a huge fan of his. I think this is pretty clear. I think he's a brilliant conservative mind. I've heard him speak. I follow what he does. I read his books, and I urge you to do the same thing because there's an awful lot that I've learned, and I know that at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we need this kind of I think we need this kind of thought process all the time. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in your book, you talk about American exceptionalism, and people will automatically say, well, if you were to ask them about it, they'd say, well, it's money, it's power, and that's not it at all. And we need to get back to that root, do we not?
Well, I think the key to all this is to realize that the Declaration of Independence was a timeless, universal document. It was the distillation by the Founding Fathers of what they believed to be the heart of the American experience. And I think that they believed it was something that was universal for all of human beings. In fact, they say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, truth is a very strong word, and these are people who used words very carefully. Mm-hmm. And the reason I wrote A Nation Like No Other is to explain to people the Founding Fathers understood a lot about human nature. They knew that if you had a big bureaucratic government in Washington, D.C., it would inevitably be corrupted. It would inevitably have insiders and favoritism and all sorts of things that would be fundamentally not part of the way in which people should operate, that people should have the rule of law, not favoritism. And I think in that sense, it's very important for us, if we want to solve our problems, to go back and understand how important it is to be able to reapply the basic lessons of the Constitution and the basic lessons of the Declaration of Independence. And the truth is, we have been a nation like no other, but the intellectual left wing, the people like Barack Obama, many of the federal judges, much of the elite news media, they would like us to become a nation that's much more on the secular European socialist model. And I think that that's what this real fight's about, and I think that's part of why the election of 2012 may be the most important American election since 1860.
No, I couldn't agree more with that. In fact, speaking of the election, the media doesn't like you. I think you've picked up on that. And you've had some bumps kicking the campaign off, and you've reset. I mean, how do you feel about things at this point? I mean, I saw an ABC hit piece again this morning, and in my world, you live in America, you make your money, you spend it any way you want to. I mean, that's part of who we are. And yet they continually come after you for that. Do you have a response to that? I mean, what are your thoughts?
My first thought is that as a conservative, I want to talk about substance. How do we create jobs? How do we help with housing prices? How do we have an American energy plan? How do we go back to balancing the budget as I did for 4 years as Speaker? How do we reform entitlements as I did with welfare reform? And the elite media is desperate to avoid any conservative substance. So any trivia, any charge, any allegation, any smear. Now, think of it as a campaign between substance and smears. I'm going to go out and make a substance speech next Wednesday, asking the question, who got our money? And looking at the Federal Reserve and the way in which hundreds of billions of dollars have been dispersed in secret. And I think the American people deserve to know who got our money. I will be very surprised if any of the elite media pick up the speech. It's at the Atlanta Press Club. It's at an obvious place. You'd think it'd be easy. But, gee, that's substance. And that's not what they're interested in. I know in the case of the ABC report that it is false, that, in fact, Reverend Jim Garlow, who's the head of Renewing American Leadership, who's a very, very respected pastor in San Diego, was just heartbroken at the dishonesty of the ABC reporters. I know that on NBC they did a hit piece this morning in which they had nobody on camera. In fact, they didn't even have anybody who was willing to talk on the record. So they talked about what their reporters told them, people had told them off the record. So they had no proof at all, no one to refute. And then having smeared me and smeared my wife, they then decided, based on their own smear, that my campaign must be over because, after all, look at these things they had just said. And you look at that stuff and you think, in a country of 14 million unemployed, can't they find some way to talk about the real world and talk about what's happening to human beings and to talk about the solutions I've offered and the tax cuts I've offered and the deregulation I've offered? And it's very clear they don't want to cover it.